Good evening, students. So we are going to answer the exam that you have answered a while ago. So let us now start. Number 1, which of the following taxonomic categories contains organisms least similar to one another? Letter A, class. Letter B, family. C, genus. D, species. Now, in answering this kind of question, it will be easier for you if you know the sequence or the order of the taxonomic hierarchy. Ano ba yung taxonomic hierarchy? The taxonomic hierarchy is this. The domain, start with the domain, which is the broadest, and followed by the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So species, siya yung pinaka-specific in the taxonomic category. So, if you go up from species to domain, those organisms that belong to these categories will become least similar to one another. But if you go down from domain to species, those organisms that belong to these categories will become more similar to one another. Now, in order to memorize this taxonomic category easily, we will use other words and then make these words a sentence for you to be easier to memorize it. So, for domain, we have deer. For kingdom, we have king. For Philip, we have phylum. And for class, we have over. For class, we have come. For order, we have over. For family, we have for. For genus, we have good. And for species, we have spaghetti. So we will just read this. Dear King Philip, come over for good spaghetti. Again, dear King Philip, come over for good spaghetti. Now, if you memorize this sentence, you can now already memorize the order or the sequence of the taxonomic hierarchy. Just remember, the first letters. For domain, we have D, that is why we have deer, and then so forth. So, the question is asking, which of the following taxonomic categories? So, ang taxonomic categories is itong mga domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, and genus, species. So, which of the following taxonomic categories contains organisms least similar to one another? So, from the choices, we will look at the choices and then hahanapin natin kung sino yung pinaka-closer kang domain. Kasi yung organisms that belonging to one domain are organisms that are least similar to one another. So, sino yung pinaka-close kay domain from the top? So, our answer here is letter C, ha? It's letter A, ha? It's letter A, class. Kasi si class yung pinaka-close kay domain. Si family, si genus, and species are those organisms that belong to these categories are more similar to one another than compared to that of the class. Number 2. Which of the following taxonomic categories organisms belonging to the same class but not to the same family? Again, this type of questions in the lab will be easier for you if you memorize the taxonomic hierarchy. Now, the question is asking, organisms are belonging to the same class, okay? To the same class, but not to the same family, okay? So, ang answer natin dito is yung in-between ng class at saka family, which is the order. Why? It's because organisms that belong to the same order also belong to the same class. Kasi in one class, there are many order. So, yung organisms naman na belong kay order also belongs to the same class. But, yung organisms na belong kay order does not necessarily na mabibilong sila into one family. Because there are many families in one order. Okay? Number 3, the transformation from a single cell into an adult individual with many different kinds of cells is called. The answer here is letter A, development. Okay? Okay? Ano ba yung evolution? Evolution is the change of genetic information within the gene pool of a population. Yung inheritance naman, ito yung traits na namamana natin from our parents. And letter D, adaptation is the change or the organism's change in behavior with reference to its environment. Example ng development is yung zygote na fertilized ni sperm, yung egg, it will become a zygote and it will differentiate into many different kinds of cells and will develop into an individual. Example dyan is tayo, no? From a zygote into a baby. Okay. And there's a difference between a growth and development. Yung growth, change in size lang. Whilst the development is maraming nag-change sa kanya, that includes its growth also. 4. Which of the following structure is not found in a prokaryotic cell? So, ano ba yung prokaryotic cell? Prokaryotic cells do not contain a nucleus, or any membrane-bound organelle. They have their DNA located in a region called nucleoid. Example of a prokaryotic cell is bacteria. So again, a prokaryotic cell does not contain or do not contain a nucleus. That means it does not also contain a nuclear membrane. Number 5. In eukaryotic cell, the region between the nucleus and the plasma membrane is called blank. So let us say that we have a cell here, and the color yellow is our nucleus, and the color black outer layer is the cell membrane. And the question is asking, ano yung tawag sa area na to between the nucleus and the cell membrane? Itong color blue, anong tawag dyan? So ang tawag dyan is the cytoplasm. This area here, dito nakasuspend yung mga organelles ng isang eukaryotic cell. Okay, so junctions, we will discuss later about junctions. Yung nucleoplasm is the area or the region between the nucleolus or the center of the nucleus and it's the area between the nucleolus and the nuclear membrane. Yung lumen naman, makikita yan doon sa mitochondria. 6. Which of the following molecules moves regularly from the nucleus to the cytoplasm? Is it A, glycogen, DNA, C, RNA, or D, cholesterol? Now our answer here is RNA. Now if you remember the central dogma of life, no, si DNA gagawa ng template for RNA. And then si RNA, tatravel siya from the nucleus to the endoplasmic reticulum or to the rough endoplasmic reticulum in which merong naka-embed na ribosomes. And then doon na idadala ni RNA, to be specific, the mRNA, yung information on how to create protein. Okay? The central dogma of life, from DNA to RNA, that is transcription. From RNA to protein, that is translation. Okay? So, ang transcription mangyayari in the nucleus. Ang translation mangyayari in the ribosomes. The creation of protein or the production of protein. Verse 7. Mitochondria are found in blank. A, in all cells. B, only in animal cells. C, only in plant cells. D, in all eukaryotic cells. Ano ba yung mitochondria? Ang mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and it is a membrane-bound organelle. So that means letter A is wrong. It's because all cells, that includes prokaryotic cells, in which prokaryotic cells do not contain membrane-bound organelle. So it's either B, C, or D. But si B and si C are included in the eukaryotic cells. So si plant cell, animal cell, and protists and fungi are all eukaryotic cells. So they contain nucleus and membrane-bound organelles, and one of that is the mitochondria. So mitochondria are found in all eukaryotic cells. Number 8. Which of the following is not correct pairing of structure with function? Okay, so is it chloroplast-photosynthesis? It's correct because photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast. Is it correct if mitochondria is responsible for the production of ATP? Yes, it's correct also because cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria. Cellular respiration is the process in which the mitochondrion produces ATP to be used by the cell. ER or synthesis of protein, pwede pa rin siya, though to be specific, yung synthesis of protein mangyayari sa ribosomes in which naka-attach siya or naka-embed within the rough endoplasmic reticulum. So tama pa rin. So si Golgi complex, hindi niya trabaho yung pag-breakdown of complex molecules. Ang trabaho ng Golgi complex is to ship materials or macromolecules from the Golgi complex to the other parts of the cell or to the cell membrane. And also it receives materials or molecules from the nucleus. It also manufactures, process, and package certain macromolecules. So hindi trabaho ni Golgi complex ang pag-breakdown ng complex molecules. Trabaho yan ng isang enzyme. Number 9. Plant cells are connected by channels through their cell walls called A. Plasmodesmata, B. Tight junctions, C. Desmosomes, D. Gap junctions. Now we will talk about cell junctions first. Ano ba yung cell junctions? These are structures that connect cells. Neighboring cells often adhere, interact, and communicate via sites of direct physical contacts. Now, our choices here are examples of cell junctions. Okay, so the first one, we have the gap junction. It is analogous to Plasmodesmata in plants. It is responsible for transferring materials from cell to cell. Example is the synapse in a neuron. Yung synapse is it is where the dendrite and the axon meet, okay, to exchange or to send impulses from other neurons. Okay, so we also have the desmosomes. It is made of intermediate filaments made of sturdy keratin proteins that anchors desmosomes in the cytoplasm. Desmosomes attach muscle cells to each other in a muscle. Okay, and we also have the tight junctions. These cells are very tightly pressed against each other. They are bound together by specific proteins. Example ng tight junctions is yung skin cells natin. That is why our skin cells are watertight. Hindi pass through yung water sa ating skin to our flesh. It's because it has a tight junctions. Now, in the first three types of junctions, cell junctions that we have discussed, the first three that we have mentioned is the gap junctions, desmosomes, and tight junctions are examples of cell junctions found in animal cells. And the last one is the Plasmodesmata, is the cell junction that we can find in these plant cells. So Plasmodesmata are channels in cell walls that connect plant cells. So our answer to our question is Plasmodesmata. Number 10. Human sperm cells move by means of a blank. You already answered this one when you request for membership for our private groups. Our answer here is flagellum. So let's take a look. Yung flagellum, so yung tail ng sperm is made up of a flagellum. Okay, we can also find flagellum to some bacteria. Ano ba yung cilia? Yung cilia is yung hair-like structure na nakapalibot sa cell membrane ng isang unicellular organism. In this picture, it is a paramecium. It's not a bacteria, ha? Why? It's because bacteria is here. Maliit lang yung bacteria. You can tell if a unicellular organism is not a bacteria because of the presence of a nucleus. Now, a bacteria is a prokaryote, meaning it does not have a nucleus. So, in this picture, it has a nucleus, so it is not a bacteria. To be specific, it is a paramecium. How about the basal body? Yung basal body is just the base of the cilia. Ito yan. Yung base ng cilia is the basal body. And then yung nakalabas na, yan yung hair-like structure na cilia. Okay. 11. Which of the following is a type of intercellular junction between animal cells? So, alam na natin na may tatlo tayong cellular junctions in animal cells. Those are tight junctions, gap junctions, and desmosome. Si middle lamella and si glycocalyx are not cellular junctions. Si Plasmodesmata naman, it is a cellular junction but it is found among plants. 12. The most abundant lipid in cell membrane is blank. So, alam na natin yon, kaya tinatawag na phospholipid bilayer si cell membrane. It's because it is made up mostly of phospholipid. Our answer here is letter A. Number 13. All membrane processes such as pumping and channeling of molecules are carried out by blank. So, is it lipids, is it proteins, carbohydrates, or nucleic acids? Our answer here is proteins. Why? It's because in the cell membrane na kung saan doon mangyayari yung active transport and passive transport of materials inside and outside of the cell, meron tayong tinatawag na mga integral proteins na naka-embed in the cell membrane. So these proteins are also known as channel proteins. They help some materials or molecules to pass through the cell membrane in order for them to go to the inside of the cell. So it's the channel protein. So yung naki-carry out ng mga active transport ng mga mechanism are aided by proteins. Number 14. Which of the following does not increase the rate of diffusion? Ano ba yung diffusion? So, diffusion is the tendency for molecules of any substance to spread out evenly into the available space. It moves from high to low concentration. So, it's down the concentration gradient. So, our answer here is increasing the size of the molecule. Why? Because pag malaki yung isang material or molecule, that means mabagal yung rate ng pag-dissolve ng molecule na yan. Pag mabagal yung rate ng pag-dissolve ng molecule na yan, mabagal din ang rate ng diffusion. Okay? So, let's say for example, gawin na lang natin yung dye molecules. Let's just imagine na isa yung cube of sugar. Okay? Pag cube of sugar, mas mabagal yung pag-dissolve ng sugar in a water. It's because malaki yung sugar, yung cube of sugar, compared to powdered sugar. So, pag mabagal siya mag-dissolve, meaning mabagal din yung pag-diffuse ng kanyang molecules into the available space in the water. So that's it. 15. The term osmosis refers to the diffusion of. So ano ba yung osmosis? Osmosis is the movement of water across a semi-permeable membrane. So it is affected by the concentration gradient of dissolved substances called dissolution's tonicity. So osmosis is simply the diffusion of water. So our answer here is A, water. 16. If you place an animal cell in a pure water, which of the following will happen? A. Water molecules will move out of the cell and it will shrink and die from lack of water. B. There will be no change. C. Water molecules will move into the cell. It will swell and may burst. D. All the cell's energy will be used to prevent the movement of water molecules into the cell. Now, before we answer this question, let us talk about solutions tonicity. So, we have three types of solution tonicity. First, we have the isotonic solution. So, the concentration of solutes, let's say for example outside the cell, is the same as it is inside the cell. Now, ano ba yung solutes? Ito yung molecules or particles or molecules na i-dissolve, hilison, tunawon. That is the solutes. Ang mutunaw is the solvent. So, ang isotonic solution daw, the same lang ang concentration ng solutes outside the cell compared to the inside of the cell. So, there will be no net movement of water. Next, we have the hypertonic solution. The concentration of solutes outside the cell is greater than inside the cell. Meaning, mas marami yung i-dissolve outside the cell kaysa doon sa inside the cell. So, ang mangyayari, the water will go out from the cell to dissolve the solutes outside the cell. So, the cell will lose water. Ang tawag dyan sa plants is plasmolysia or will undergo ng plasmolysis. It will shrivel or it will shrink yung cell. The third one is the hypotonic solution. Now, hypotonic solution is the concentration of solutes outside the cell is less than inside the cell. So, maliit lang yung concentration ng solutes outside the cell compared to the inside of the cell. So, ang mangyayari doon is papasok yung water inside the cell because marami ang i-dissolve na solute inside the cell. So, ano mangyayari is the cell will gain much water, it will swell, muhubag, and may burst or lyse, no? Puputok yung cell. Okay, ito yung mangyayari. Let's say for example, ilalagay natin ang isang red blood cell sa isang hypotonic solution. Remember that in hypotonic solution, marami ang solute inside the cell, maliit lang yung solute outside the cell. So, ang mangyayari, yung water, marami ang water na papasok sa red blood cell kasi marami ang di-dissolve inside the cell. So, ang cell is magsiswell, muhubag siya, and then after that, it may burst or it may lyse, puputok. In an isotonic solution, if you put a red blood cell in an isotonic solution, normal lang yung cell kasi nga yung concentration ng solute outside and inside the cell is equal lang. Meaning, yung papasok na water and then lalabas na water, equal lang din. So, hindi maapektuhan yung cell. In a hypertonic solution naman, mas marami yung i-dissolve na solute outside the cell compared to that inside the cell. So, ano mangyayari? Lalabas yung water para i-dissolve yung maraming solute outside the cell. So, ang mangyayari sa cell is mag-shrivel or mag-shrink. Liliit yung cell kasi nawala ng tubig yung cell. Iba din yung mangyayari if plant cell ang inilagay mo sa hypotonic solution. Though makaka-receive ang plant cell ng maraming tubig, hindi ito magbe-burst. It's because of the presence of its cell wall. So, pagkakaroon tayo ng turgor pressure, kaya matitigas yung plants, it's because they have cell wall and then maraming tubig within their cell. Okay? How about in an isotonic solution? Okay, flaccid lang. Calm lang yung yung plant cell pag ilalagay natin sila sa isang isotonic solution. Pero pag inilagay mo yung cell sa isang hypertonic solution, ang mangyayari, lalabas yung water from the cell outside the cell para i-dissolve yung solutes outside the cell. So, ang mangyayari is mag-shrivel or magpa-plasmolyze yung cell. So, yung cell membrane, ito yung cell membrane, hihiwalay siya sa cell wall. Kaya, if you observe yung mga plants na hindi natin nadidiligan is mulunay siya. It's because it lacks water. Okay. So number 16 in our question. So our answer here. So if you place an animal cell in pure water, so yung pure water dito, meaning walang ibang particles or molecules na nasa labas ng cell. It's because pure water lang. So walang i-dissolve. So anong mangyayari? So which of the following will happen? So ang mangyayari, yung water outside the cell papasok kay animal cell. So it will swell and it may burst. So letter C ang answer dito. 17. When the fluid outside the cell has a greater concentration of a given molecule than the fluid inside the cell, the external fluid is blank. So mas marami daw yung solute outside the cell kaysa doon sa inside ng cell. So lalabas yung water from the cell to the outside. So ang mangyayari, mag-shrivel or mag-shrink yung cell. So ang external fluid ng cell is hypertonic. Now, to remember this easily, para hindi tayo malito between hypertonic and hypotonic, ito lang. It's only applicable in those people na marunong magbisaya. In hypertonic, meron tayong hyper na word or hyper na term. We have H, letter H, and letter H and letter E. So, ang mangyayari sa cell, pag inilagay mo sa hypertonic solution, in Bisaya, muhiyos siya. Okay? Muhiyos. H-E, hyper. Hiyos. Pag inilagay mo yung cell sa isang hypotonic solution, we have hypo, H-O, muhubag ang cell. And then it will become, or it may burst or lyse. Okay, number 18. You also answered this in our private group. Pressure on a plant cell wall caused by osmotic movement of water is called its turgor pressure. Okay? Number 19. Which of the following methods for transporting substances across a membrane does not involve a change in shape of the transport protein? Now, if you remember the active transport utilized channel proteins to move inside or outside the cell materials. So, the question is asking, saan daw dito yung hindi nakakapag-pababago sa shape ng transport protein? So, ang hindi nakapagpapabago ng shape ng transport protein in our choices is yung diffusion, because diffusion is a passive transport. It's not an active transport. To be specific, it's a simple diffusion. Kasi yung facilitated diffusion, even though passive diffusion, passive transport siya, it also needs a help from a protein. So it may change the shape of the transport protein. But sa simple diffusion, hindi siya gumagamit ng transport protein. So it will not involve a change in the shape of the transport protein. Number 20. Which part of the neuron conducts impulse from other neurons toward the cell body? Letter A, axon. B, ganglia. C, synapse. D, dendrites. Now, our answer here is dendrites. Okay? So, let's take a look of the neuron. So, this color yellow na nag-branch dito, ito, yan. Tawag dyan are dendrites. So, dendrites receives signals from other cells. Yung axon naman, they will send signal to the other cells. So, ang question kasi natin is, which part of the neuron conducts or receives impulse from other neurons, and then magsisend siya ng impulse na yun toward the cell body. So, from the dendrites to the cell body. Okay? In Bisaya, dendrite siya yung mo dawat. D for dawat. Dendrite siya ang mudawat o impulse. Okay? Next, the process by which a cell secretes macromolecules by fusing a transport vehicle to the plasma membrane is called A. Pinocytosis, B. Phagocytosis, C. Endocytosis, D. Exocytosis. Now, let's talk about bulk transport muna. So, ano ba yung bulk transport? We have two main types of bulk transport. We have the exocytosis. Exo, meaning ipapalabas. Exo. Transport vesicles migrate to the plasma membrane, fuse with it, and release their content. So, nagpapalabas ng materials from the cell to the outside of the cell. The second one is the endocytosis. Endo meaning papunta sa loob. So the cell takes in macromolecules by forming new vesicles from the plasma membrane. It can be pinocytosis or phagocytosis or a receptor mediated sa endocytosis. Now, ito yung mangyayari if ang cell is undergo ng exocytosis. So we have here the transport vesicle, no? If you fuse niya yung membrane niya into the cell membrane, and then i-release niya yung content niya outside or into the extracellular fluid. Now remember that the membrane of a vesicle and the cell membrane is pareho lang yung composition nila. Kaya it's possible for them to fuse their membranes. Okay? Ang kabaliktaran naman yung nangyayari sa endocytosis. Sa exocytosis, may pinapalabas na material outside the cell. Sa endocytosis naman, may pinapapasok na material or molecule inside the cell. It's either a phagocytosis or cell eating, or the pinocytosis or the cell drinking. And then, so ini-engulf ng cell using its pseudopodium or its phosphate, yung food particle or isang bacteria, and then magka-create na naman siya ng isang vesicle, and then ita-transport yan kung saan siya kinakailangan inside the cell. So we have three types of endocytosis. Again, phagocytosis, cell eating. So yung malalaki na molecules or a bacteria yung kinukuha nila to the cell or inside the cell. Then we also have the pinocytosis or the cell drinking. So pino meaning gagmay lang na molecules ang iyahang ginakuha, no, nga nakasuspend in the extracellular fluid. So apil na draa ang inside the vesicle na makreate is yung extracellular fluid in which the molecule is suspended. In the receptor-mediated endocytosis, there are certain receptors in the cell membrane in which very particular siya kung usa lang molecule ang pwede nga i-attach sa iyaha. And after that, it will also create a vesicle coated with a protein which is a receptor. Okay, next. So, the answer to our question number 21, saan daw dito yung nagsisecrete? Okay? When we say secretes, nagpapalabas ng macromolecules. So, nagpapalabas, it's exocytosis. 22. The process by which a unicellular organism, such as an amoeba, engulfs a food particle by first enclosing it within a pseudopodium and then packaging it in a membrane-bounded vacuole is called blank. Again, yung amoeba daw is nag-engulf ng isang food particle, meaning nagpapapasok, gusto niyang ipasok yung isang food particle sa kanyang inside the cell. Okay? So, ang tawag dyan, cell eating, right? So, it's the phagocytosis. Yan. Ito yung pseudopodium na na-create para and then ini-engulf niya yung solid particle tapos create na naman ng isang food vacuole, and then it will be transported to the other parts of the cell kung saan siya kinakailangan. 23. The function of cellular respiration is to blank. So it's very easy. And the main function of cellular respiration is to make ATP or adenosine triphosphate. 24. Which of the following process makes direct use of oxygen? Is it A. Glycolysis, B. Krebs cycle, C. Fermentation, or D. Electron transport chain? So let's talk first about cellular respiration. Okay, so cellular respiration or aerobic respiration is the harvest of food energy. Aerobic means the process needs oxygen. So it happens in the mitochondrion. So there are many phases in the cellular respiration. First is the glycolysis, and then the pyruvate oxidation. We also have the citric acid cycle or the Calvin cycle. And last one, we have the oxidative phosphorylation or the electron transport chain. Now, during glycolysis, by the way, glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. So during glycolysis, it requires one glucose. Yung isang glucose is, it will be split or into two pyruvates. Okay? It will be split into two pyruvates or two pyruvic acid. So in this process of splitting the glucose into two pyruvates is known as glycolysis. So it will also produce 2 NADH or reduced nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide and 2 ATP as NAD. So we have here the chemical equation, glucose. This is the chemical equation of the cellular respiration. Glucose is added by oxygen, and then yung product niya are carbon dioxide, water, at saka energy in the form of ATP. Now, the next phase of cellular respiration after glycolysis is the pyruvate oxidation. Now remember that the outputs or the products of glycolysis will be used in the pyruvate oxidation. So ang output naman ni pyruvate oxidation is 2-acetyl coenzyme, dalawang molecule ng carbon dioxide, at saka dalawang NADH. And this output of the pyruvate oxidation will then be used by the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle, also known as the tricarboxylic acid cycle. So yung output ng Krebs cycle is 4 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 NADH, 2 FADH, and then 2 ATP. So again, yung products ng Krebs cycle will then be used to do the electron transport chain or the oxidative phosphorylation. And the output of ETC or electron transport chain are 32 to 34 ATP and water. Now remember that oxygen is the final electron acceptor in this stage to form water. So kaya nga tinatawag siyang aerobic yung cellular respiration. It's because it requires oxygen in its electron transport chain. So we have here a total of 36 to 38 ATP in just one molecule of glucose. So 2 of that is from the glycolysis, 2 from the Krebs cycle, and then 32 to 34 from the electron transport chain or the oxidative phosphorylation. Now take note that there are other sources that do not agree with these numbers, but we will just remember this one. No? So let's go back to our question. Which of the following process makes direct use of oxygen? So again, oxygen is the last electron or the final electron acceptor in the electron transport chain. So walang gagamitin na oxygen in glycolysis at saka in Krebs cycle. Oxygen will be used only in the electron transport chain. In fermentation, we will talk about that later. Okay, so our answer is again letter D, electron transport chain, because this is the only phase in which the mitochondria will use oxygen. Number 25. Each chemical reaction in cellular respiration requires A. Is it ATP? Is it NAD plus? Is it a molecule of FAD or a specific enzyme? Now remember guys that in every chemical reaction it requires a specific enzyme. Whether it is the cellular respiration or the photosynthesis or any chemical reaction, it requires a specific enzyme. So our answer here is letter D, a specific enzyme.